The wind was cold that morning, biting at James Miller's face as he approached the courthouse steps. Each step felt heavier than the last. His legs weighed down by anxiety. He clutched the straps of his old backpack as if holding onto it would keep him from falling apart. His mother, Margaret, walked silently beside him, her face pale and tense, while his little sister, Emily, held tightly to her stuffed rabbit. At just 10 years old, Emily didn't fully understand the gravity of what was happening, but she sensed her brother's fear. "James," Margaret said softly, breaking the heavy silence. "Whatever happens in there today, just remember we're with you. Always." James didn't reply right away. He couldn't trust his voice not to crack. Instead, he nodded, swallowing hard and focusing on the courthouse looming ahead like a fortress. He'd never been inside a courthouse before. In fact, he'd never been in trouble before, not like this. At 17, James was the kind of teenager most parents would be proud of. He was quiet, respectful, and kept to himself. He liked sketching superheroes in his notebook, reading science fiction novels, and playing with his sister in their small backyard. But none of that seemed to matter now. To the world, or at least the prosecutor's office, he was a vandal, a troublemaker, someone who didn't respect the law. The case had spiraled out of control so quickly that James could hardly remember how he ended up here. One moment he'd been sneaking into the old abandoned warehouse near their neighborhood, trying to protect a stray dog that had taken shelter there. The next, he was being accused of vandalizing the place, spray painting walls, breaking windows, and trespassing on private property. The warehouse owner, a gruff man named Mr. Hancock, had filed charges without hesitation. James's court-appointed lawyer, Miss Benson, was waiting for them inside the courthouse lobby. She was a tall woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a brisk, no-nonsense demeanor. James had only met her twice before, but she had already made an impression as someone who knew what she was doing. "James," she said, greeting him with a nod. Her tone was calm but firm. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," James lied. Ms. Benson studied him for a moment before turning to Margaret. "We're going to take this one step at a time. The judge assigned to the case is Edward Marshall. He's tough, but he's fair. The key is to be honest and respectful in your testimony." Margaret nodded, gripping James's arm for reassurance. "We trust you, Ms. Benson. Just please help them see that James is a good kid. He doesn't deserve this." Ms. Benson gave her a small, sympathetic smile. "That's exactly what we're going to do." The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings, polished wooden benches, and the imposing figure of Judge Marshall presiding over it all. James felt small and out of place as he took his seat at the defendant's table. The prosecutor, Mr. Wallace, was already there, flipping through a thick folder of documents. He barely glanced at James, as if the case were already decided. "All rise," the bailiff called, and everyone stood as Judge Marshall entered the room. He was a tall, stern man with silver hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through people. "You may be seated," the judge said, his deep voice echoing through the room. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file in front of him. "This is the case of the state versus James Miller. Charges include trespassing and vandalism. How does the defendant plead?" James glanced at Ms. Benson, who gave him a slight nod. Taking a deep breath, he stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Not guilty? Yet you admit to being on the property in question?" "Yes, Your Honor," James replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But I wasn't there to cause any harm. I was trying to help." "Help?" the judge repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Explain." James hesitated, glancing at Ms. Benson. She motioned for him to continue. Taking another deep breath, he began to speak. "There's a stray dog that lives in the warehouse," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "She had puppies a few weeks ago, and they were starving. I've been bringing them food and water, trying to take care of them. The warehouse is in bad shape, holes in the walls, broken windows. I used some scrap wood I found to cover the windows and keep the wind out. I didn't mean to trespass. I just didn't know where else to go." The room was silent for a moment. Even the prosecutor seemed momentarily taken aback by James's explanation. The judge studied him carefully. So you're telling me you entered private property without permission, but your intention was to care for stray animals? Yes, Your Honor. And the spray paint? The graffiti found at the scene? The prosecutor interjected, his voice sharp. What about that? I didn't do that, James said firmly, turning to face the prosecutor. I don't even own spray paint. Someone else must have done it. But it wasn't me. Miss Benson stood, her expression calm but confident. Your Honor, I have evidence to support my client's claims. I'd like to submit photographs taken at the warehouse, as well as statements from neighbors who witnessed James bringing food and supplies to the animals over the past several weeks. The judge nodded, motioning for the bailiff to collect the evidence. He took his time reviewing the photographs, his expression unreadable. One photo showed the golden retriever curled protectively around her litter, their tiny bodies barely visible under a tattered blanket. Another depicted James kneeling beside a makeshift water bowl, his face filled with concern. This is certainly compelling, Judge Marshall said after a long pause. He set the photos aside and looked directly at James. Mr. Miller, while your intentions may have been noble, the fact remains that you broke the law. Trespassing is a serious offense, and private property must be respected. James's heart sank. He felt Margaret's hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. However, the judge continued, his tone softening slightly, I also believe in second chances. Given the circumstances and the compassion you've shown, I'm inclined to dismiss the charges on the condition that you complete 50 hours of community service at the local animal shelter. Additionally, I will ensure that the stray dog and her puppies are taken in by the shelter and given proper care. James's relief was overwhelming. Thank you, Your Honor, he said, his voice trembling. The judge gave him a small, rare smile. You're welcome, Mr. Miller. Consider this a lesson in seeking the proper channels when you want to help. Next time, ask for assistance before taking matters into your own hands. Yes, Your Honor, James replied. After the hearing, James stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, his shoulders feeling lighter than they had in weeks. Margaret pulled him into a tight hug, her tears soaking into his shirt. You did it, James, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom, James murmured, hugging her back. Emily grinned up at him, clutching her stuffed rabbit. You're like a real-life superhero, James, saving puppies and everything. James chuckled, ruffling her hair. Not quite, but thanks, kiddo. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences. James spent his afternoons at the animal shelter, cleaning kennels, feeding animals, and learning how to care for them properly. He quickly bonded with the golden retriever and her puppies, who were thriving under the shelter's care. Word of James's actions spread through the community, transforming the initial whispers of scandal into admiration. Neighbors who had once judged him began stopping by the shelter to donate supplies or adopt animals. James's school even featured him in their monthly newsletter, praising his dedication to animal welfare. Through it all, James learned valuable lessons about responsibility, compassion, and the importance of doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. One evening, as he watched the golden retriever and her puppies being adopted by a loving family, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He hadn't just saved them, he had given them a chance at a better life. For the first time in a long time, James felt like he was on the right path. And as he walked home that evening, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, he knew he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to TAO Stories for more powerful tales of hope, humanity, and redemption.